welcome to the February the 17th, 1987 taping of It Happened, as we bring back memories of Grand Prairie of the past. This is our history tape number 36, and we are very excited today to bring to you one of the old-time families of Grand Prairie, Texas that was very important to the development here, that have since moved away, but not far enough away that we could not get them back to be with us to help our history tape continuing. And we also have a very special young man that has had a very important sequence in a special happening in Grand Prairie, Texas. So at this time, we're just delighted to welcome Mr. and Mrs. Clay Hines that are on my immediate right. Mr. Hines, we're very glad to have you with us, young man.
Glad to be here.
Wonderful. And Jimmy Hines, it is just splendid to have you with us today. And we would like to have the record to show that Mrs. Shirley Meadows, your wonderful daughter, helped us to arrange this wonderful interview. And if we had 5 chairs, we would have had Shirley on the show here today also, because it's very important to pull together an interview such as this. Now we're going to begin with Mr. and Mrs. Hines, and let them tell us a little something for the record, our genealogy record, a little bit about when they came to Grand Prairie, where they came from or where their parents came from. And Mr. Clay Hines, we're going to begin with you. Would you tell us a little bit about your parents and how you came to Grand Prairie, Texas in the past?
Well, sir, I came to Grand Prairie in 1936. I was working for a construction company for Mr. Finch.
All right.
He was superintendent for a construction company in Dallas.
Mm-hmm.
And I went to work for him at Shamrock, Texas, building post office.
Wonderful.
And from there we came down to Dallas to build the federal building out at the Centennial in 1936.
That's wonderful. And Mr. Hines, how did you find yourself in Grand Prairie, Texas? What brought you to Grand Prairie particularly?
Well, it was too hot to live in Dallas.
Too hot to live in Dallas. That's a very good reason.
We lived on 12th Street, and we came out when Mr. Perkins started development in Burbank Gardens.
All right, and Burbank Gardens is located in the northeast portion of Grand Prairie, Texas. And you worked in concert with Mr. Perkins, and when you all began the development of Burbank Gardens, what was in that area at that time?
Well, it was a dairy farm and a wheat field when we come.
A dairy farm and a wheat field, and do you remember who owned the dairy farm in that area?
Mr.
McCoy.
Mr. McCoy.
All right. Mr. McCoy owned all of that as a dairy farm, and you all purchased that land and then began a wonderful development in the Burbank Gardens area, which now includes northeast, say, 23rd, 24th, 25th, and on to Myers Road and Reinhardt and those streets. Well, that's wonderful. And living in Grand Prairie on 12th Street, this was a wonderful change for you, for coming from the Dallas area out into a small town. How did you take to the small town of Grand Prairie, Texas?
Well, I was raised in West Texas on a farm and ranch.
And tell us the name where you came from.
Mirador, Texas.
Wonderful. That is good. Would you like to give us your parents' name from that area of Texas so we would have that for our record?
Yes. My daddy is Henry Hines.
All right.
Mother was Minnie Martin, and my granddaddy Martin was a rancher in Motley County.
Wonderful.
And my granddaddy Hines was a farmer in White Flat, Texas.
All right. But you came into Grand Prairie in the building, construction, development business. And how long did you stay in that particular business in Grand Prairie, Texas?
About 23 years.
About 23 years. So for 23 years, you made a definite impact on the building of the city of Grand Prairie and into the community and all of these good things. Mr. Hines, did you serve on any of the committees of the city or on the school board or anything like that, or were you just a very important builder?
I stayed out of that.
You stayed out of that. All right. In your business association, do you remember any of the leaders of the city of Grand Prairie? Who was the mayor and who was the big wheel?
Mr. Turner, G.H. Turner was mayor
All right.
of the Grand Prairie.
All right.
And Mr. Bingham was the president of the State Bank in Grand Prairie, which was at that time the only bank in Grand Prairie.
All right. Now, Mr. Hines, we're going to let you rest just a minute, and we're going to go to Jimmy because she had an important part here in Grand Prairie in your life. And Jimmy, would you tell us about your immediate family? Tell us the names of your children, where they live now, and then we'll get into the grandchildren in a minute if you have any of those wonderful items.
Well, we had 3 children, Shirley
All right.
Hines Meadows,
All right.
and Norma Brown, and Ted Hines.
All right. Now, we know that Shirley lives in Dallas. Now, where would we find Norma or Ted?
Norma lives in Duncanville.
All right.
I mean Cedar Hill.
Cedar Hill.
And Ted lives in Fort Worth.
Oh, well, you have them all in the Metroplex, don't you? Isn't that wonderful? All right. Now, from these 3 wonderful children, did they attend the Grand Prairie schools?
Yes, they started in Grand Prairie and finished in Grand Prairie.
At good old Grand Prairie High School, right?
Right.
Good. And while you were here raising these 3 wonderful children, were you involved in the PTA or clubs or anything in Grand Prairie?
Right.
Tell us what you did. Do you remember any of that good stuff?
Oh, carnivals and all that good stuff.
All right.
Oh, this
Just
general
helped with the
flunky.
PTA? Wonderful. That is just great. What elementary schools did they attend? If you lived on 12th Street, were they into Travis or Crockett, or do you remember their schools?
Travis, I believe it was.
Travis, okay.
Travis,
That's
right.
down in the Fairview area.
Right.
Oh, that is wonderful. All right, now, of these 3 children, do you have any grandchildren? And if you do, we'd like for you to name your child and any of the grandchildren you'd like to, and tell us anything you'd like to about your grandchildren.
Well, Shirley has 2 daughters.
All
Who
right.
are married. One daughter has a son.
So you have a great-grandson.
Right.
How wonderful. Give us your granddaughter's names and that great-grandson's name, so we'll have that for our record.
Rhonda Lawrence.
All
She
right.
lives in DeSoto.
All right, and the next one?
And then her other daughter is Wendy Wells.
All
She
right.
lives in Cedar Hill. Well, we'll call it Cedar Hill.
All right.
And then Norma has 2 sons. One is a lawyer in Amarillo.
All right.
And one is studying law in Waco.
All right.
And Ted has 2 sons.
Okay.
One is in Dallas and one is in Fort Worth. And that son has a son, which is our great-grandbaby.
All right, and which one of your of Ted's 2 sons has the child, so we can name
Ted.
it? Ted. It's Ted Jr. Okay.
Ted's son is Tracy.
Tracy. Okay,
Right.
so you have Tracy, and Tracy is the one that has this new son that is your
Right.
great-grandson.
Great-grandson.
That's marvelous. Well, all of the time that Mr. Hines was involved in the building business here, contracting and et cetera, and the children were in school, what did you think about being a resident of Grand Prairie compared to the other places maybe?
Oh,
that
we
you
loved
lived?
it. We looked all over before we came to Grand Prairie.
And you found that this was the best place that you
We
wanted
did.
to live?
We did.
who were some of your neighbors that lived near you down in the Fairview area that you would like to name drop so that we can pull some of this good stuff together? Do you have memories of some of your good friends, or where you went to church here in town, some of the people that we'd like to pull together?
The Reeds, they are Carol Reed and
All right.
his mother.
All right.
I can't think of the other one. But we attended for a while the Bowles Memorial Baptist Church.
Mm-hmm. That's down in the Burbank Gardens area.
Right.
That is still a working little church.
Mm-hmm. And then we came on to First Baptist.
All right. Now, let's get back to Mr. Clay Hines just a minute. Mr. Clay Hines, of all of the time that you were in Grand Prairie, what do you feel like was some of the turning points for the development of Grand Prairie, where it grew from a farming community and blossomed and really became a growing little city?
Well, Grand Prairie made a big change when the World War II came on.
All right.
And the Chance Vault, or North American, was built where Chance Vault is now. And there was great development in GI homes after the war, which brought on the major building development throughout Grand Prairie and Arlington.
All right. Now, we're going to let both of you rest, and we're going to the gentleman on your far right there, Mr. O.W. Reed, who now resides in Arcadia Park, which is in,
Cockrell Hill.
Cockrell Hill, which is just east of Arcadia
Well,
Park.
it's really in Dallas.
It's really in Dallas then. But you have your own little city, don't you?
No, we're in Dallas.
You're in the Dallas part of that.
Oh.
All right, Mr. Reed. Now, Mr. Reed, you're very important to the history of Grand Prairie because I believe you performed one of the most exciting feats in the Burbank Gardens area that we want to document on this history, that you've already given us a personal interview and we made pictures. Would you tell us a little bit of something about your history in Grand Prairie, in East Grand Prairie, and look right out into your camera, and we want everyone to meet you, Mr. O.W. Reed, who has been in the house moving business since you were a very young man.
It's all right. I went in house moving business in about 1936.
All right.
And a little earlier there, of course, I was in house moving business all my life. I helped my dad when we came here in a covered wagon in 1912.
All right, give us your dad's name that came with you here in 1912.
W.A. Reed.
Mr. W.A. Reed, and your mother's name?
Clara Reed.
Clara Reed, and what was her maiden name?
Went.
All right. Then now we have you all coming here in a covered wagon from what direction?
Bell, Missouri.
From Bell, Missouri. And where did you settle in this area?
On the Marcella Street Viaduct.
Under the Marcella Street. Now that's a good place. That's where some of our transits settle today, and that's a good place.
We
isn't it?
stayed there the first year.
All right.
And then
stayed
we
there.
went to come here. My dad came here to help another house mover move McGinnis's places for the Dallas Fire and Light over on Singleton.
All right.
And then on, why I helped him until more about 18 or 19. And then when I bought him out in about 19, and I guess I bought him out, and I don't remember exactly, but I'd say 19 and 28 or 30 along there somewhere. Of course, then you had to have two jobs. I had a wood yard and a house moving business to make a living.
All right.
And then work day and night.
All right. Now, we know that your wonderful wife is out here in our studio audience today. Would you like to give us her name and her maiden name so that we'll have all of that on our history
Well,
record?
her name is Goldie Lucille Dinsmore when I married her and changed her name.
All right. And she has helped you in your business all these years?
60 years.
Yes, and she told us she didn't want to be on the show, but you're going to talk about her, aren't you?
Yeah.
And how many children do you and Goldie have?
2 boys.
2 boys. Would you give us their names?
Herbert, Edward,
Herbert?
and Donald. Donald Webster and Herbert Edwards. Herbert's oldest and Donald's youngest.
All right. Do you have any grandchildren?
Well, let's see if I can remember them all. We have 5 grandchildren, 9 great-grandchildren.
How marvelous.
But don't ask me all their names, ask her.
Oh, right. All right. Now, even though you live in Cockrell Hill, Dallas portion, you did a lot of work in Grand Prairie moving houses, but there's one particular house that I want you to talk about and tell us as much as you know.
You mean the old Minnie Bowles home?
The old Minnie Bowles home that is now a Grand Prairie significant landmark, has a state marker, and we're very proud of this.
I moved it in somewhere between 1936 and 40, but I'm not for sure. In that business, I didn't keep very much of a record of them, so I don't really remember. She might.
Now
I moved their house right afterwards.
All right. Now this, the old Bowles home, where was it located before you moved it?
Right off of Myers Road, and Claude McCoy lived in it when I moved it.
Claude McCoy lived in it, and was he the man that had the dairy?
Yes, I.
All right. All right. Now, where was it located off of Myers Road? To the east or the west of Myers Road?
West.
To the west of Myers Road? Yeah. Right in the middle of probably what Northeast 29th is at this time?
Yeah.
All right, because Myers Road would be 30th Street if it weren't Myers Road.
Well, it is right along in there. Of course, then it was just a gravel road there, I believe, and nothing else.
All right, now, who made the request to you to move this old home in which Mr. McCoy lived? Was it Mr. McCoy or someone else?
Miss Minnie Bowles.
All right, now, what interest did she have in the home and in Mr. McCoy's house?
Well, that was her old home place. Her great-grandpa or somebody built it.
I see.
So she told me, and he probably knows more about that than I do on who built it, because...
All right, we'll get into that with Mr. Hines then in a minute. Now, how long did it take you to move this house, and how did you move it, please, Mr. Reed?
Well, back then you rolled out on rollers and pulled them with a blocking falls or a capstan.
All right, and you rolled this house or this cabin on the rollers all the way down to where it's located now on Northeast 28th and Bowles Street, right?
That's right. Mm-hmm.
All right, and Minnie Bowles asked you to do this or paid you to do this?
Yeah. That's the first tip. She gave me a $100 tip for moving it.
Gave you a $100 tip plus the fee for moving the house. During that time, is it good ethics for you to tell us what she paid to have you move that house plus the $100 tip?
I don't have any idea.
You don't have any? All right. Wonderful. We just thought maybe we could get a little bit more historical
No, it wasn't very
facts.
much, though, it was then back then, because you paid the men about $3 a day.
All right. Now, how many people did you use to move this house? Approximately. 1, 5, bigger than a bread box?
About 7 or 8.
About 7 or 8 men.
You roll them on rollers, you know, somebody had to carry the track and somebody had to carry the roller for each shoe, which has 4 shoes. Each one has their rollers. And then you roll it just a little bit, and then you carry some track and roll it a little bit more.
How long did it take you to move the old Bowles home?
I'd say the whole job was a week or 10 days.
Week or 10 days.
And when I quit the business, I could move it in 1 day.
All right. All right. Well, we appreciate so much your getting out of almost a recuperating sick bed to come and be with us today with Mr. Hines, because I know that you all work closely together in many of your endeavors. And is there anything else you want to talk with us about that particular move, or anything about the Burbank Gardens area before we go back to Mr. Hines?
Well, the only thing I'd like to say about it, all the time we was moving it, Mr. McCoy lived in it, and all the men come and ate dinner there while we was moving.
All right. And did they feed you all lunch or breakfast or any of this good stuff?
Miss Bowles don't most of the time she did that most of the time.
Did she purchase the house from the McCoys?
Oh, no, she owned that whole country in there.
She owned all of the whole country, and he just
down
lived
the river.
all the way to the river. Okay. Mr. Reed, if you'll stay with us just a few minutes, then let's go back to Mr. Clay Hines. Mr. Hines, tell us what you know about the moving of the house and anything else that happened in Burbank Gardens, because you have some pictures to show us. Would you take out your pictures of the old Langford Water Tower and some of the landmarks that used to be very important to Grand Prairie, Texas? And we'd like for you to hold those up where our camera can get them if it's not too much of a glare. Now, that's the one on the old water tower, and
That's right.
where was that located in Burbank Gardens?
That was just east of
No.
Mars Road
All right.
on Bold Street.
On Bold Street.
Corner of
All
Bold
right.
Street and 31st Street.
Why was that called the Langford Water Tower?
Well, he was the man at that time that furnished all the water for Burbank Garden.
All right. Did he put
drilled.
down all the pipes and all of this good
He
stuff?
drilled the well and put the pipe. He did most of the digging with a bill dookie for the ditches where he put the pipe.
Wonderful. And for many long years, that was the water system down in East Grand Prairie, wasn't it?
Right, many years.
All right. Now, would you like to maybe show us this next picture of some of the first homes that were built on Northeast 31st when that was almost virgin territory down there, when that looks still like a dairy farm, doesn't it?
Yeah. Well, this was built north of Bold Street on the east side of 31st Street, running north. And that was the first houses built there, and the material was furnished by a lumber company here in Grand Prairie. I can't call that right now.
All right. Would you like to show us this photograph, too, of some of the area down in Burbank Gardens as the building was
now
going?
this was built up by on 32nd Street.
All right.
Down the west side. Mr. Barnett and his partner built on the east side of the 31st Street, 32nd Street.
All right.
All down that side. These were the first houses that was built in the development of, in the line of development of number of houses built.
All right.
The
Now,
others were
we want you to
individually.
show the field office that you all operated from down there and explain to us where that was located.
Now, this field office was located at the corner of 32nd and Rhine Street. Reinhardt.
All right.
Reinhardt Street. And Mr. Purcell, Paul Purcell,
All right.
who was a son-in-law of Mrs. Bowles, operated the office.
All right. That is wonderful. And that's who operated out of this other than Purcell? Did you operate out of this building?
Well, no, he sold all of the lots to the builders that was in that area at the time.
All right. Now, what was your role in the development of the Burbank Gardens area?
Well, my role mostly was when I first went to Burbank Garden, went to building, was for Mr. Perkins, whose office was down on the corner of Mars Road and East Main,
All right.
or Highway 80.
Okay.
And we built houses for them, for people that come and purchase the lots.
All right,
At that time, the lots sold for $5 down and $5 a month.
Mhm. Do you know what the cost of a lot was, say a 50-foot by 100-foot?
Yeah, they ran anywhere from $150 up to $500.
All right, now you have mentioned this Mr. Perkins, and I don't know which of the Mr. Perkins this would be. Do you remember his first name?
Mr. Perkins was a railroad clerk out of Houston,
All right.
and he came to Grand Prairie and bought this tract of land from Miss Bowles,
All right.
Miss Minnie Bowles, and went in and cut out the streets and laid off the lots and sold them to people that went out there and built. And as I was telling you, these houses, it's built on 31st or 32nd, were the first houses that was built by developers. the other houses were individually built for individual people.
All right. Now, we'd like to ask you this, Mr. Hines. Did you ever meet Minnie Bowles?
Yes, Miss Bowles, I was was a very good friend of ours, and in fact, the business where how I met with Mr. Reed was that he moved this cabin, and I was located on 31st. And when they had the FHA houses built, well, they traded I traded that property for property up on Bowles and 31st.
That's exciting. All right, tell us a little bit. No one, of course, Miss Minnie did not have any children. She has no descendants in this area. We'd like to know a little bit about her, if you all know anything about Miss Minnie. Either you or Mr. Reed, you had business associations, of course, with her. Do you know anything about Miss Minnie Bowles, other than the fact that she was an artist? We know that she did some painting and was a very philanthropic as far as the Bowles home is concerned, and did give that to the city of Grand Prairie, and it's a very important historical site. Mr. Reed, do you have anything to contribute?
She called me at 2 o'clock one morning to come over to look at her house, that the bug was eating it up or something. 2 o'clock in the morning woke me up, said something eating up my house. I said, what are you talking about? It's 2 o'clock in the morning. And she said, well, I'm sitting here doing something, and then I looked up there and I seen holes come in my paper, and said, and it's a new house. And I said, well, the termites are getting started. I'll be over there about 9 o'clock in the morning.
Wonderful. How about you, Mr. Hines? Do you have any memories of Miss Minnie Bowles?
The first time I had met her was when, at the time of the moving of the cabin. And, my brother went to work for her after the cabin, after Mr. Reed moved it up there, and she remodeled it at that time and built onto it and developed it into what it was when she gave it to Grand Prairie as a park.
All right, now you've given us an important clue. We have only 2 minutes left on our tape, but you must tell us your brother's name and his importance in remodeling the home. And do you remember what date any of that took place? What's your brother's name, first of all?
First of all, his name is Ott Hines.
O-T-T?
O-T-T-I-S, Otis Hines.
All right, and where does he live, or is he still living?
He's in the not Shady Grove, but Bridgeport.
He's in Bridgeport, Texas. Okay, wonderful. And do you remember anything about the remodeling of the house, or anything that you can give us approximately when this happened?
He was the caretaker for Miss Minnie Bowles for about two or 3 years.
Well,
and
wonderful.
he had nothing to do with remodeling of the house.
Do you know who did the remodeling of the house?
No, I don't.
Oh,
I don't
right.
know.
We thought we had a good clue there, but we'll work on that with your brother Otis from Bridgeport.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank you all very much for taking the time to come and be with us. We're almost out of time. Mr. Reed, you're very important to us in the moving of the house. And Mr. Clay Hines, as someone who actually witnessed it, we're so pleased that you all would take the time and come in from Cedar Hill, Texas, where you all live now. And we again want to thank Shirley for seeing that you all got to us today. And thank you one more time for being with us. And if you would remain on the set while we close the show. And this is Ruthie Jackson reminding you that history is as we live and do.